6:47 in the morning. That's when they came for my gate. I'd been awake for maybe 10 minutes, still in that fog between sleep and consciousness, when the sound hit me, metal screaming against metal, the kind of noise that doesn't belong in a quiet Sunday dawn. By the time I reached the window, the damage was done. My custom wrought iron gate, the one I'd designed myself after Elena passed, lay twisted on the gravel like a broken promise. There were 6 of them, white polos with HOA enforcement printed across the back. A diesel truck idles behind them, and Gerald Gomez was standing at the edge of my property line with a megaphone, looking like a man who had never been told no in his entire life. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for 3 weeks. Before you judge what happened next, let me tell you how we got here. And hey, drop a comment below, letting me know where you're tuning in from. I have a feeling this story hits different, depending on where you call home. 3 months before that satisfying morning, I stood on this same porch watching the Arizona sun paint the Sonoran desert in shades of copper and amber. The saguaros cast long shadows across my half-acre lot, and a cactus wren sang somewhere beyond the mesquite fence. 18 months have passed since Elena lost her battle with cancer. This house, a single-story ranch on the outskirts of Tucson, was the first thing that made me feel like life might be worth living again. I'd spent 15 years saving for a place like this, far enough from the city to breathe, close enough that my daughter Lily could finish her senior year without switching schools. When the realtor mentioned the HOA, I barely listened. Monthly dues, community upkeep, standard suburban stuff. I paid on time and assumed that was the extent of my obligations. My proudest project was the front gate. After Elena passed, I spent 3 months designing it wrought iron with a sun motif at the center, rays extending outward like hope cutting through darkness. I hired a local blacksmith named Jorge to forge it, and when it was finally installed, I stood in the driveway and wept for the first time since her funeral. That gate wasn't just hardware, it was the one thing I'd created with my own vision since becoming a widower, and the Architectural Review Committee had approved my design without a single objection. I kept their approval letter in my filing cabinet, right next to Elena's death certificate and Lily's birth certificate documents that proved the most important moments of my life. Dad, there's a weird letter in the mailbox. Lily appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, holding an envelope stamped with the HOA logo. I took it from her and tore it open. Inside was a single page with Violation Notice Number 1, printed in aggressive red letters. According to the document, my gate was non-compliant with community architectural standards and needed removal within 30 days. A $75 fine was attached, payable immediately. I read it 3 times. The approval letter was 10 feet away in my office. This had to be a clerical error. What does it say? Lily asked. Nothing important, just a misunderstanding. That afternoon, I pulled out the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions governing our community. I'm a software engineer by profession, which means I have a compulsive need to understand systems before I fight them. Section 4 covered architectural modifications. Nothing prohibited wrought iron gates. Nothing banned custom designs. The language explicitly permitted fencing and entry features consistent with the desert aesthetic. My gate, with its earth-toned finish and southwestern motif, fit that description like it was written for me. I photographed the relevant pages and saved them to a folder on my laptop labeled HOA Documentation. Engineers document everything. It's how we survive. The next morning, I called the HOA office. A woman answered with a voice like frozen metal. When I explained the situation, the approval letter, the missing violation, the apparent contradiction, she put me on hold for 7 minutes. When she returned, she offered exactly 1 sentence. Mr. Gomez will contact you directly. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, feeling something unfamiliar stir in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Just the distinct sensation of stepping onto a game board whose rules nobody had bothered to explain. That evening, I did my usual walk-through checking locks, testing the alarm panel, and making sure the windows were latched. It's a habit I developed after Elena died. The house felt too big without her, and the rituals helped fill the silence. When I passed our bedroom, my eyes landed on the gun safe in the corner. Inside was my father's Mossberg 500, a pump-action shotgun he'd willed to me 8 years ago. I'd fired it twice at a range, both times feeling like I was holding a piece of history too heavy for my hands. "Hope you never need it," Dad had said. "But if you do, know how to use it." I checked the safe's battery indicator full charge and moved on without opening it. The next afternoon changed everything. Lily and I were eating lunch when she froze mid-sentence, her eyes locked on the kitchen window. I followed her gaze. A white SUV with HOA Security Patrol stenciled on the door was creeping down our street at walking speed. It stopped directly in front of our house. 30 seconds. The driver's face was invisible behind tinted glass. Then it rolled away without explanation. Neither of us spoke. But when I looked at my daughter, I saw something I hadn't witnessed since the weeks after her mother's funeral, a kind of animal alertness, the recognition that safety is never guaranteed. That night, I walked the property perimeter with a flashlight, examining my camera setup with fresh eyes. 3 years old, 4 cameras total, blind spots on the east side yard and the rear corner near the irrigation controls. When I'd installed the system, I figured it was sufficient for package theft and coyote sightings. Now those gaps felt like open wounds. I made a mental note: upgrade immediately. Add infrared capability, eliminate the dead zones. Something was shifting in the atmosphere around our quiet life. A pressure change I couldn't name but could absolutely feel, like the humidity spike before a monsoon breaks. I told myself it was nothing, a bureaucratic hiccup. Some administrator are checking boxes to justify their salary. The gate would stay, the fine would get reversed, and by next month, this would be a funny story I'd tell at neighborhood barbecues. Standing on the porch that night, watching stars emerge over the desert, I almost believed it, almost convinced myself that the world still operated on logic and fairness and documented approval letters. I had no idea that Gerald Gomez had already decided my gate would come down, and that he was willing to burn everything around it to make that happen. 2 weeks of silence. I'd almost convinced myself the violation notice was a clerical ghost, some automated error that would quietly dissolve. Then the second envelope arrived, thicker than the first. Urgent, stamped in the corner, like a threat dressed in bureaucracy. I opened it at the mailbox, too impatient to wait. Violation, notice number 2, same complaint. But the fine had doubled to $150, and an additional page warned that continued non-compliance would trigger a lien against my property. 3 hours of legal research later, I learned what that meant in Arizona. HOA liens can lead to foreclosure. They could take my house over a gate they'd already approved. The third day after that notice, Gerald Gomez appeared on my porch. I recognized him from community newsletters, late 50s. Silver hair combed back like a television preacher, eyes that calculated while his mouth smiled. 6 years as HOA president, former property manager, the kind of man who collected small powers and wielded them like inherited wealth. He stood there with a clipboard and a polo shirt embroidered with the HOA logo, radiating the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no from anyone beneath him. "Mr. Anderson?" No handshake offered. "I wanted to discuss your gate situation face to face, neighborly." I kept the screen door between us. "There's nothing to discuss. I have an approval letter from the architectural committee." His smile held steady. "Standards evolve. The board reviewed your installation and determined it no longer aligns with community expectations." He gestured vaguely toward my driveway. "It draws attention, makes neighbors uncomfortable. I followed every procedure, submitted plans, received written approval." Something flickered behind his eyes, surprise at resistance, or irritation at having to work for this. "Documentation can be reconsidered, approvals can be revoked." The smile finally cracked, showing teeth. "I'd encourage you to think about whether this hill is worth dying on. Mr. Anderson, 30 days, then we proceed to enforcement." He walked back to his white SUV without waiting for a response. I watched the dust settle behind his tires and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. This wasn't bureaucracy. This was personal. The surveillance changed texture after Gerald's visit. Before, the patrol SUV had passed once or twice daily, annoying but ignorable. Now it crawled by 4 or 5 times between sunrise and sunset. The driver occasionally lifting a phone to photograph my property, but the real damage happened beyond my sight lines. Neighbors who had waved hello during my first year suddenly developed fascinating relationships with their shoes when I walked outside. Conversation stopped when I approached the community mailbox cluster. I became a ghost in my own neighborhood, visible but unacknowledged. Lily brought the poison home from school. A classmate daughter of a board member had loudly asked why the Anderson house was under surveillance. The question metastasized through the senior class within days. By Friday, my daughter was eating lunch in the library, pretending she preferred books to company. She didn't tell me this directly. I found out because she stopped mentioning friends altogether, and when I picked her up from school, her eyes had that hollow quality I remembered from the months after Elena's death. I called a real estate attorney named David Moreno, working off a recommendation from a colleague. The first 30 minutes were free. I laid everything out: approval letter, violation notices, escalating fines, and lien threat. He listened without interrupting. "Document everything," he said. "Every letter, every patrol pass, every interaction, dates, times, photographs. Arizona courts love paper trails. And if they try to remove the gate themselves, they'd be trespassing. Arizona has castle doctrine. Your property line is your castle. They'd need a court order, and no judge grants those for aesthetic complaints." He paused. "But, Mr. Anderson, people like this don't play by legal rules. They count on you backing down before it reaches court. The question is whether you can outlast them." And that afternoon, I sent a formal response via certified mail citing the original approval, quoting CCNR sections, and requesting documentation of any policy changes. The tracking number joined my growing evidence file. Then I waited, watching the patrol SUV make its rounds like a shark circling shallow water. The night visit started 2 days later. I woke at 2 a.m. to a sound I couldn't place: soft, rhythmic, like careful footsteps on gravel. I lay frozen, listening. The sound stopped, started, stopped. I moved to the window without touching the lights. The street was empty except for a single vehicle at the far end of the block, the patrol SUV, headlights off, engine dead, just sitting there in the darkness, watching. I stood at that window for 20 minutes. The SUV never moved. Neither did I. But something between us had changed, an unspoken acknowledgement that this conflict had migrated from paperwork into something more primal. They wanted me to feel hunted in my own home, and it was working. The next morning, Lily found me in the kitchen before sunrise, coffee already cold, laptop open to the Pima County Sheriff's non-emergency line. She looked at the screen, then at my face, and I watched her childhood retreat another few inches. "Dad," her voice was barely audible. "I'm scared." I pulled her close, feeling her shoulders tremble against my chest. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Over her head, my eyes found the bedroom doorway, the corner where the gun safe waited. I'd checked the battery 3 weeks ago, but hadn't opened it since we moved in. Elena had never liked guns. She'd tolerated my father's shotgun as a family heirloom, something to be stored and forgotten. But Elena wasn't here anymore, and the people circling our home didn't care about documentation or approval letters or legal procedures. They cared about power taking it, keeping it, crushing anyone who threatened their grip. I held my daughter until her breathing steadied. Then I made a decision I had been avoiding since that first violation notice arrived. Tomorrow, I will open the safe. The harassment campaign began in earnest the following Monday. A letter accused me of excessive noise violations, no dates, no times, no complaining neighbor identified, just a $100 fine for disturbances that never happened. I worked from home as a software engineer. My loudest activity was typing. The accusation wasn't meant to be believable. It was meant to exhaust me. 4 days later, my irrigation system went dry. I discovered the problem when the prickly pear near the front walkway started yellowing a death sentence in Arizona's May heat. A call to management produced a recorded message about scheduled maintenance. When I drove through the neighborhood that evening, every other lawn was green. Every sprinkler is running. Only my property had been disconnected. The outage lasted 5 days. By the time water returned, 3 saguaros showed stress fractures that would take years to heal. They were killing my garden by bureaucratic suffocation. The garbage truck stopped coming next. I watched it roll down our street Thursday morning, pausing at every house except mine. When I flagged down the driver, he shrugged without meeting my eyes. "Obstruction notice. Your cans aren't accessible." My cans sat exactly where they had sat for 18 months, same spot every resident used, on a curb with no obstacles for 50 feet. I filed a complaint with Waste Management. They promised an investigation. Nothing came of it. Then Gerald sent the email 237 households. Subject line designed to draw blood. Property value alert, non-compliant resident threatens our investment. He didn't name me. He didn't need to. The message warned that one homeowner's stubborn refusal could decrease values by 15%. It urged residents to encourage compliance through community solidarity. Translation: make their lives unbearable until they break. The consequences landed on Lily like a collapsing roof. Her remaining friendships evaporated overnight. A group project partner requested reassignment. The senior prom committee, which she'd helped organize since September, voted to remove her, citing scheduling conflicts. She came home with mascara streaked down her face and didn't emerge from her room until dinner. When she finally appeared in the kitchen doorway, her voice was sandpaper. "Why won't you just change the stupid gate?" Arms wrapped around herself like she was physically holding herself together. "I hate it here. Mom would have wanted us to be happy, not fighting the whole neighborhood over some piece of metal." For one weak moment, I considered surrender, removing the gate, paying every fine, making her senior year something other than a war zone. Then I remembered what Elena had spent her final months teaching our daughter: stand for something, or you'll fall for anything. If I back down now, they won't stop. I kept my voice steady. They'll find another rule, another fine, another target. This isn't about the gate anymore. It's about whether people like Gerald get to destroy anyone who won't bow. Lily stared at me, nodded once, retreated without another word. I wasn't sure if I'd convinced her or lost her. The final notice arrived 3 days later. Scheduled removal of non-compliant structure 7 days out. No court order, no legal filing, just a declaration that HOA enforcement would enter my property and dismantle the gate with or without consent. I called David Moreno immediately. They can't do this legally. For the first time, I heard alarm in his voice. There's no mechanism allowing HOA personnel to enter private property without court authorization. If they try, it's criminal trespass class 6 felony if they bring tools. What do? Report it to the sheriff now, before anything happens? Create a paper trail showing you warned authorities. And Mr. Anderson, he paused. Arizona law allows property defense. I'm not telling you to escalate, but know your rights backward and forward. That night, I ordered 2 wireless security cameras, infrared capability, cloud backup, 48-hour battery life. They'd arrive in 3 days, giving me time to eliminate blind spots before the deadline. Then I called the Pima County Sheriff's non-emergency line and reported the threat. The deputy gave me a case number and advice I'd already internalized. If they enter without permission, call 911 immediately. When I hung up, the house felt different, quieter, more serious. I walked to the bedroom and stood in front of the gun safe for a long moment, feeling Elena's disapproval radiating from her photograph on the nightstand. She'd hated firearms, tolerated my father's shotgun only because it meant something to me. But Elena wasn't here, and the people circling our home didn't care about approvals or procedures or documented harassment. They cared about power. I punched in the code. The Mossberg 12-gauge sat where I'd left it oiled, maintained, 5 rounds of buckshot in the tube. I lifted it, feeling the weight settle into my palms, and carried it to the living room. It would stay within reach until this ended. Outside, darkness had swallowed the desert. I settled into my chair with the shotgun propped against the armrest and watched the street through the front window. The patrol SUV passed at midnight, slowing to a crawl in front of my driveway, passed again at 2. At 4, it stopped entirely, engine off, lights dead, just sitting there at the end of the block like a promise of violence. I didn't sleep, didn't move, just watched. They wanted me afraid, wanted me broken and compliant, wanted me to abandon everything Elena and I had built because a man with a clipboard decided my gate offended his authority. 6 days until they came. 6 days to prepare. I thought about the cameras arriving tomorrow. The sheriff's case number is saved in my phone. The documentation I'd built showed every violation, every harassment, every lie. And the shotgun beside me, not a threat, but a boundary. A line drawn in Arizona dirt. They'd started this war over a piece of wrought iron, but it wouldn't end with metal. It would end with them understanding that some people don't break, some homes don't fall, and some hills are exactly worth dying on. The cameras arrived Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Gerald's deadline. I spent 4 hours in the brutal Arizona heat, positioning each unit with surgical precision, 2 covering the front gate from opposing angles, 1 monitoring the backyard near the irrigation controls, the 4th hardwired inside the garage to a backup server. Every inch of my property line would be documented in high-definition infrared, uploading simultaneously to cloud storage and local drives. If they destroyed one system, the evidence would already exist in 3 other places. When I finished, I tested each feed on my laptop until I was satisfied. No blind spots, no excuses. Whatever happened next would be witnessed. That evening, I reviewed the Arizona statutes one final time. The law was unambiguous. Entering someone's property without permission or legal authority was criminal trespass. Bringing tools with the intent to damage elevated the charge to a felony level. Castle doctrine meant I had no duty to retreat from my own land and could use reasonable force to prevent unlawful entry. The critical word was reasonable. Displaying a weapon to deter trespassers was legal. Firing without an imminent threat to life was not. I needed to know exactly where the line sat and stay precisely 1 inch behind it. The next morning, Deputy Sergeant Ray Delgado from the Pima County Sheriff's Office returned my call. I walked him through everything: the approved gate, the violations, the harassment campaign, the final notice threatening unauthorized entry. He listened carefully, asking occasional questions, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen this pattern destroy families before. "Mr. Anderson, you did the right thing creating a record. If these HOA people enter your property without a court order, that's criminal trespass. Their uniforms don't give them police powers. Their bylaws don't override state law." I asked what to do when they showed up. Call 911 immediately. Don't engage physically unless you have absolutely no choice. And if you choose to be armed on your own property, that's your right. Just keep any weapon pointed at the ground unless your life is directly threatened. I spent the afternoon fortifying. Heavy planters filled with rocks went up inside the gate, a temporary barrier that would buy 60 seconds if someone tried to drive through. The shotgun moved to a position near the front door, loaded but safetied, visible through the window to anyone approaching. I wasn't provoking confrontation. I was establishing boundaries, making it clear that this home wouldn't fall without witnesses and consequences. The hardest conversation came that evening. Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table when I sat across from her. "I need you to stay with the Martinez family for the next few days, until this resolves." She looked up, eyes searching my face for something I hoped she wouldn't find. Rosa Martinez had been Elena's closest friend, and their property sat 20 miles outside HOA jurisdiction, the safest place I could send her. "Dad, I don't want to leave you alone." Her voice cracked. "You being safe is what matters most." I told her, "I need to handle this without worrying about you in the crossfire." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Promise me you won't do anything stupid." I squeezed her hand across the table. "I promise I'll only do what the law allows." I drove her to the Martinez house the next morning, watching her disappear through their front door with fear still clouding her eyes. Rosa hugged me on the porch and promised to keep her safe. I believed her. Elena had always chosen her people well. Kelly Reyes messaged me that afternoon, the neighbor 3 houses down, the only person in this community who'd shown any conscience. Her words were brief and electric. They rented a truck, big one. Gerald was on his phone, saying tomorrow morning, early, please be careful. I read it twice, feeling the timeline collapse. Tomorrow morning, 18 hours away. That night, I killed every light in the house and took my position by the front window. The darkness felt appropriate, like the world was holding its breath alongside me. The patrol SUV made its rounds at midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., each pass slower than the last. On the final circuit, it stopped at the end of my driveway for nearly 10 minutes, headlights cutting through pre-dawn murk while the engine idled like a threat. I sat motionless with the Mossberg across my knees, camera feeds glowing on the laptop beside me. Let them look. Let them see the house wasn't dark because I was sleeping. Let them understand that whatever came next would be answered. The SUV pulled away as gray light touched the eastern horizon. I ran through my checklist one final time, Phone 911 on speed dial, case number saved, attorney's contact ready, cameras all 4 feeds recording, green light steady, shotgun safety engaged, 5 rounds loaded, barrel pointed at the floor, coffee brewing, mind clear. 18 months ago, I'd moved to Arizona seeking peace, a quiet place to raise my daughter and rebuild after loss. I'd followed every rule, filed every form, asked permission for every modification, and still they'd come for me not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I'd refused to kneel, because my gate represented something Gerald Gomez couldn't tolerate, a man who knew his rights and wouldn't be intimidated into surrendering them. The first sliver of sun crested the mountains, painting my damaged saguaros in shades of gold. Somewhere out there, a truck was starting its engine. Somewhere, men were pulling on white polos with enforcement printed across the back. Somewhere, Gerald was rehearsing whatever speech he'd prepared for the moment. He finally broke me. He had no idea what was waiting. I lifted my coffee cup toward Elena's photograph on the mantel. "Watch over us today," I whispered. Then I settled into my chair, eyes fixed on the road, and waited for them to make the worst mistake of their lives. 6:15 in the morning. The sun hadn't cleared the mountains yet, but I was already on my 3rd cup of coffee when the sound reached me. Diesel engines, multiple vehicles, approaching from the main road. I moved to the window and watched the convoy materialize through the gray light like a slow-motion nightmare. A flatbed truck with a crane attachment led the procession, followed by 3 white pickups bristling with equipment and men. They stopped in a neat formation just outside my property line, engines idling, exhaust plumes rising into the cool desert air. I counted 7 figures climbing out, all wearing matching white polos with HOA enforcement printed across their backs. And there, stepping out of the lead pickup with a megaphone in his hand, was Gerald Gomez, dressed like he was attending a board meeting, silver hair perfect, expression radiating the calm certainty of a man who'd never lost a fight in his life. I picked up my phone and dialed 911 before he even raised the megaphone to his lips. The dispatcher answered on the 2nd ring. 911, what's your emergency? I kept my voice steady, clinical, the way I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times. My name is Albert Anderson. I'm at 4723 Saguaro Ridge Drive. There are 7 people outside my property threatening to enter without a court order. I have a case number from a previous report, 24783. I'm requesting immediate law enforcement assistance. The dispatcher asked if anyone was armed. I have a legally owned shotgun inside my home. I'm not threatening anyone. She told me units were being dispatched and advised me to stay inside unless necessary. I thanked her and kept the line open, setting the phone on speaker. Gerald's amplified voice shattered the morning stillness. "Attention, Mr. Anderson, pursuant to the authority granted to this board by our community covenants, we are here to remove the non-compliant structure from your property. You have 60 seconds to open the gate and allow access. Failure to comply will result in forced entry and additional fines." I watched him through the window, this small man with his small power, and felt something crystallize in my chest. Not fear, not anymore, just cold, clear purpose. The enforcement team moved toward my gate with bolt cutters and pry bars. I grabbed the Mossberg, checked the safety one final time, and stepped onto my front porch. The morning air hit my face like a slap, cool, dry, electric with tension. I stayed well within my property line, feet planted on the wooden deck Elena and I had rebuilt together, and held the shotgun pointed at the ground with both hands visible. "This is private property." My voice carried across the yard without amplification. "You have no court order. You have no legal authority. I've already called the sheriff. Leave now." Gerald lowered his megaphone and walked toward the gate, stopping just on the public side of the property line. His smile hadn't wavered. "Mr. Anderson, are you threatening us with a firearm? Because that would be a very serious mistake." I could see his phone in his other hand, probably recording. Good, let him record. My cameras were capturing everything from better angles. "I'm standing on my own property exercising my constitutional rights. Arizona. Revised statutes protect my right to defend my home against unlawful entry. You are attempting unlawful entry. This is your only warning." The enforcement team hesitated, looking between me, Gerald, and uncertainty rippling through their ranks. One of them, a younger guy, maybe mid-20s, lowered his bolt cutters slightly, but Gerald wasn't backing down. "Continue," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "He's not going to shoot anyone. He's bluffing." The team leader, a thick-necked man I'd later learn was named Tony Breslin, stepped forward and clamped the bolt cutters around my gate's lock. Metal screamed against metal. The lock held for 3 seconds, then snapped it with a sound like a gunshot. They pushed my gate open, the gate I'd designed in grief and built in hope, and it swung inward with a groan that felt like something being torn from my chest. The flatbed truck began rolling forward, tires crunching on my gravel driveway. They were on my property now, trespassing, committing a felony in broad daylight with cameras rolling and a 911 dispatcher listening through my phone's speaker. "You're now committing criminal trespass." I raised my voice so there'd be no ambiguity in the recordings. "Class 6 felony under Arizona law because you're carrying tools with intent to damage property. Every person who crosses that line is subject to arrest. This is your final warning." Tony Breslin stopped the truck about 30 feet from my porch, engine still running. The enforcement team gathered behind him, tools in hand, waiting for orders. Gerald strode through the gate like he owned the place, megaphone forgotten, face flushed with triumph. "Put the gun down. Anderson, you've lost. Accept it with some dignity." I didn't move, didn't raise the barrel, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "The sheriff is already on the way. Everything happening here is being recorded from 4 different angles. You want to explain to a judge why you ordered 7 men onto my property without legal authority? Because I have 3 weeks of documentation showing exactly how we got here." For the first time, something flickered in Gerald's eyes. Doubt, maybe, or the first cold touch of consequence. He opened his mouth to respond, and that's when we all heard it. Sirens, faint at first, then growing louder, coming from the direction of the main road, multiple vehicles, moving fast. The enforcement team froze. Tony Breslin's head snapped toward the sound. Gerald's face went pale beneath his tan, and I watched 6 years of unchecked authority begin crumbling in real time. "Everyone stay exactly where you are," I said, allowing myself the smallest smile. "You're about to meet some actual law enforcement." 2 sheriff's department cruisers screamed around the corner and skidded to a stop at the end of my driveway, light bars painting the dawn in red and blue. Deputies emerged with hands on their holsters, taking in the scene with trained eyes, the truck on my property, the men with tools, Gerald standing in my driveway, me on the porch with a shotgun pointed at the ground. "Everyone freeze, drop all tools, and keep your hands visible." I set the Mossberg down slowly, keeping my movements deliberate and non-threatening. The cameras kept recording. Gerald stood motionless in my driveway, finally understanding that his rules had never been the ones that mattered. The real authority had arrived. The next 90 seconds unfolded with the precise choreography of a situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. Deputies spread across my driveway, voices sharp with command, hands hovering near holsters. "Drop the tools! Everyone step away from the vehicle!" Tony Breslin let his pry bar clatter to the gravel first, raising his palms in surrender. The others followed, their bravado evaporating like morning dew under the brutal Arizona sun. Only Gerald remained motionless, standing in the middle of my driveway like a man who couldn't process that the rules had fundamentally changed. One deputy approached me on the porch, eyes moving between my face and the shotgun I'd set down. "Sir, are you the homeowner? Are you Albert Anderson?" I confirmed my identity, keeping my hands visible, movements deliberate. "I'm the one who called. That's my firearm, legally owned, never pointed at anyone." A third cruiser arrived as the deputy secured my weapon, and Sergeant Ray Delgado stepped out with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd walked into 100 volatile situations and resolved all of them. I recognized his voice from our phone conversations, calm, measured, unshakable. He surveyed the scene methodically, the flatbed truck on my property, the broken gate hanging from one hinge, enforcement personnel with hands raised, Gerald frozen with his megaphone dangling forgotten. "All right," Delgado announced. "Homeowner over here, gentleman in charge over there. Everyone else stays exactly where they are until we sort this out." We assembled in 3 groups like opposing armies at a negotiation, me on the porch steps with one deputy, Gerald near the broken gate with another, The enforcement team lined up beside the truck under watch. Delgado positioned himself at the center, a neutral arbiter in a conflict that had been anything but neutral. He turned to Gerald first. "Sir, identify yourself and explain what's happening here." Gerald straightened his polo shirt, attempting to reassemble his authority from scattered pieces. "Sergeant, my name is Gerald Gomez. I'm president of the Saguaro Ridge Homeowners Association. We're conducting a lawful enforcement action against a property in violation of community standards. This man threatened us with a firearm when we attempted to exercise our legitimate authority." Delgado's expression remained unchanged. "Do you have a court order authorizing entry onto this property?" The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. Gerald's jaw tightened visibly. "Our CC&Rs grant the board authority to—" "I didn't ask about CC&Rs," Delgado interrupted, voice calm but edged now. "Court order, yes or no?" Silence stretched between them. 3 heartbeats, 4. "No," Gerald admitted, "but the homeowner has been non-compliant." "Then you entered private property without legal authorization. Based on the tools scattered across this driveway, that's a felony. Mr. Gomez." I watched Gerald's face cycle through disbelief, indignation, and finally the first flicker of genuine fear. Something loosened in my chest. Not triumph, just quiet satisfaction, watching reality catch up with a man who had spent years outrunning it. "Sergeant, I have complete video documentation," I said. 4 cameras covering every angle, recording since before they arrived. Everything that happened here is preserved." Delgado nodded. "We'll review all of it, but first," he turned back to Gerald, "I'm going to ask some questions. I'd advise you to think carefully before answering." And what happened next was the moment Gerald Gomez destroyed himself. Instead of remaining silent, instead of requesting an attorney, he launched into a tirade that handed us everything. "This is absurd. I've served this community for 12 years. We have a responsibility to maintain standards. This man has defied legitimate authority since he arrived. His gait is an eyesore. His attitude is poison. I gave him every opportunity to comply. So, yes, I authorized this. I personally approved it. Someone had to enforce the rules." His voice cracked on the final words, desperation bleeding through the bravado. Delgado let him finish, then glanced at me. "Did you record that?" I gestured toward the camera above my garage door. Green light steady. "Every word." A deputy made a sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Gerald's face went ashen. I retrieved my laptop and pulled up the footage. We watched the convoy arrive, Gerald's megaphone ultimatum, and the team cutting my lock. But the most damaging clip came from an angle I'd nearly forgotten, the side yard camera capturing Gerald on his phone. "Before the assault, just go in. He won't do anything. I'll take full responsibility." Delgado paused the video. When he turned to Gerald, his expression carried the weight of a verdict. Mr. Gomez, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and criminal damage to property. You have the right to remain silent." A deputy approached with handcuffs. Gerald's composure was completely shattered. "You can't do this. I'm a community leader." But the cuffs clicked shut, and his protests dissolved into the morning air as they'd never carried any weight at all. The enforcement team watched their leader being guided toward a cruiser. I saw the exact moment each realized they'd followed a man off a cliff. Tony Breslin caught my eye and shook his head, the universal gesture of catastrophic recognition. "He told us it was legal," he said to no one. "Said the board had authority," Delgado overheard. "Boards don't authorize felonies. We'll need statements from everyone, but cooperation will be noted." Deputies processed the scene while neighbors gathered at the property edge, drawn by sirens and spectacle. For the first time in months, they weren't avoiding my gaze. They were watching Gerald Gomez in the back of a sheriff's cruiser, watching his small empire collapse in real time. Sergeant Delgado approached me last, extending his hand. Mr. Anderson, you handled this exactly right. Documented, called immediately, never escalated. Most people would have made this worse." I shook his hand, exhaustion settling into my bones like sand filling an hourglass. "I just wanted to keep my home." He nodded. "You did, and you exposed something that's been happening here for years. The county attorney will be very interested in Mr. Gomez's history." I stood alone on my porch after the cruisers departed, staring at what remained of my gate. One hinge torn from the post, the sun motif bent but unbroken, still catching light the way it had the day Jorge installed it. Elena had never seen the finished design she'd passed 3 weeks before the ironwork was complete. But standing here now, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped until this moment. The gate was never just metal and craftsmanship. It was a declaration, a line drawn in desert soil saying, "This is mine, this matters, this will not be taken without consequence." Gerald had seen an eyesore. I'd built a monument to survival. The morning sun flooded the property with golden warmth, illuminating damage that would heal and victories that wouldn't fade. I pulled out my phone, suddenly desperate to hear my daughter's voice. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the fear she'd been carrying for weeks dissolve as I spoke. "It's over, sweetheart. Come home." 2 days after the arrest, Detective Maria Santos from the Pima County Sheriff's Office arrived at my door with a digital recorder and questions that would take 3 hours to answer. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a manner suggesting she'd heard every lie humans could invent. I walked her through the entire timeline: violation notices, escalating fines, service disruptions, the community email, and the final notice. She listened without interrupting, expression revealing nothing. When I finished, she asked to see my documentation. I handed over the folder containing every letter, photograph, and timestamp from the past 3 months. She flipped through it methodically, occasionally photographing pages. "Mr. Anderson," she said finally, "this is one of the most thorough evidence files I've ever seen from a civilian." The county attorney filed charges 3 days later. Gerald faced 2 Class 6 felonies: trespassing and property damage, plus conspiracy charges based on the phone recording where he'd directed his team onto my land. Tony Breslin faced a misdemeanor for his role, though Detective Santos mentioned privately that his full cooperation would likely reduce his sentence. The remaining team members received immunity in exchange for testimony, confirming Gerald had repeatedly assured them the action was legal, but the investigation expanded beyond that Sunday morning. Detective Santos called a week later with news that reframed everything I thought I understood about Saguaro Ridge. "Your situation isn't isolated, Mr. Anderson." 3 families had experienced nearly identical campaigns over the past 5 years. The Nguyen's endured 14 months of harassment over a backyard garden before selling and fleeing. The Crawfords fought for 2 years over solar panels despite state laws protecting renewable energy rights until legal fees broke them. A third family, whose name Santos couldn't share, had simply vanished from the neighborhood after Gerald decided their landscaping was inconsistent with community character. The pattern was unmistakable. Gerald had been running a petty kingdom, systematically crushing anyone who challenged his aesthetic dictatorship. David Moreno filed our civil lawsuit the same week. We sued Gerald personally for intentional infliction of emotional distress and the HOA for negligent supervision. The damages: $4,500 for gate repair, $50,000 for emotional distress, $150,000 in punitive damages. David also demanded the HOA cover legal fees if we prevailed a provision designed to hit their insurance carrier hard and force the board to reckon with what they'd enabled through years of willful blindness. The community's response exceeded my expectations. A petition demanding the removal of all current board members gathered momentum within days of Gerald's arrest. Kelly Reyes collected 37 signatures in a single weekend, going door to door with a determination that made me understand why she'd risked Gerald's wrath to warn me about the truck. The board called an emergency meeting and invited me to attend as an affected community member. I declined. My fight had been with Gerald, not with neighbors who'd been as intimidated as anyone else. Let them rebuild their governance without my shadow hanging over the process. Lily returned home the day after the arrest. The first week was difficult. She'd jump at unexpected sounds, check windows when cars passed, but I watched her healing begin in small moments that accumulated like rain filling a dry wash. Maya started visiting again. The prom committee reached out with apologies and a renewed invitation. One evening, I found her photographing the recovering saguaros in the backyard. "For evidence," she said with a half smile that echoed her mother so strongly it hurt. In case anyone tries to say we exaggerated, I didn't tell her I'd already documented everything. The act of documenting was part of her healing, taking control of a narrative that had nearly consumed us both. The settlement offer arrived 3 weeks after filing. The HOA's insurance carrier wanted this buried $80,000. No admission of wrongdoing, mutual non-disclosure. David called, with careful neutrality in his voice. It's decent money for the speed. Most HOA cases drag on for years. I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. No. Silence stretched across the line. Mr. Anderson, trials are expensive and unpredictable. This is guaranteed. I looked out at the temporary chain-link barrier standing where my gate had been. I don't want their money to disappear quietly. I want them in front of a judge, admitting what they did. I want it on the public record so the next Gerald Gomez knows exactly what happens when you believe rules don't apply to you. David was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, I could hear the smile in his voice. I'll inform opposing counsel we're proceeding to trial. And Mr. Anderson, it's been a genuine pleasure representing someone who cares about principles over payouts. That night, Lily and I sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains in bands of orange and amber. The desert had settled into its evening quiet, insects humming, a coyote calling somewhere in the distance. My property still bore scars. The gate remained broken. 3 saguaros would need years to fully recover. But we were here, still standing on ground that belonged to us, still refusing to be erased by a man who'd confused authority with power and compliance with respect. Dad, Lily's voice was soft against the gathering dusk. Do you think Mom would be proud? I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Elena had hated conflict, avoided confrontation whenever possible, but she'd also been the one who taught Lily and reminded me, when I needed reminding, that integrity meant nothing if it only existed when convenient. I think she'd be proud we didn't run, I said, and I think she'd be proud we won the right way. Lily nodded and leaned against my shoulder. We stayed there until stars emerged over the desert. 2 people who'd discovered that home isn't defined by property lines or architectural standards or the approval of small men with clipboards. Home is what remains when everything else has tried to take it from you, and ours was still standing. 6 months later, I stood in a Pima County courtroom and watched Gerald Gomez accept a plea deal that would define the rest of his life. His attorney had spent weeks negotiating, but the evidence was simply too overwhelming. 4 angles of footage, recorded admissions, his own team testifying against him. Gerald had 2 choices: plead guilty or risk maximum sentencing at trial. He chose mercy. The judge delivered consequences with dispassionate efficiency: 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, a 10-year prohibition from holding any HOA leadership position in Arizona, restitution of $25,000 paid directly to me. Gerald stood motionless as the sentence was read, silver hair less perfect than I remembered, his suit hanging like borrowed clothes. When the judge finished, he turned and caught my eye. I expected defiance. Instead, I saw exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of a man who had finally run out of people to blame. He looked away first and walked out of my life without another word. Tony Breslin received 1 year of probation and a $2,500 fine. He'd cooperated fully and testified truthfully. After the hearing, he approached me in the hallway with his hat literally in his hands. Mr. Anderson, I know, sorry doesn't fix anything, but Gerald made it sound official, legitimate. I should have asked questions. I studied his weathered face, his calloused hands. He wasn't so different from me, just a guy who'd trusted the wrong authority. Ask them next time, I said. That's all any of us can do. He nodded, shook my hand, and walked away with his shoulders straighter than when he'd approached. The civil case settled 2 weeks before trial. The HOA's insurance carrier had watched the criminal proceedings and decided a jury verdict could be catastrophic. Final offer, $120,000, full legal fees, and a formal apology signed by every remaining board member, acknowledging Gerald's actions had been unauthorized and illegal. I took it without hesitation. The money mattered less than having accountability and writing a precedent that the next family facing this kind of tyranny could point to. The new HOA board took office in a special election. Kelly Reyes won a seat alongside 2 residents who had quietly opposed Gerald for years. Their first action, comprehensive CCNR amendments requiring supermajority approval and 60-day notice for any enforcement. Their second, inviting me to the community's summer barbecue, the first since Gerald had transformed gatherings into loyalty tests. Lily graduated from high school on a bright May morning. I sat in the audience watching her cross the stage, trying not to cry, thinking about how far she'd traveled from the girl who'd eaten lunch alone in the library. She'd been accepted to the University of Arizona, close enough to visit, far enough to build her own life. The night before graduation, we sat on the porch, and she surprised me with something I hadn't expected: humor. "I learned that standing up for yourself isn't looking for a fight," she said, "and I learned you should always have backup cameras." I laughed until I nearly spilled my coffee. Her mother's wit, sharpened by everything we'd survived. The new gate was installed on a Saturday in late June. Jorge, the blacksmith who'd forged the original, insisted on recreating it at cost. The design was identical wrought iron with a sun motif at the center, rays extending outward, but he'd added something on the back. Invisible from the street, a small inscription in flowing script: "Stand your ground." I ran my fingers over the letters as the crew packed up, feeling cool metal warm under my touch. The barbecue happened 2 weeks later. 8 families came, including the Nguyens, who'd driven from Phoenix specifically for the occasion. We grilled burgers and watched kids chase each other across the yard and talked about everything except the past. At one point, Mrs. Nguyen pulled me aside and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for finishing what we couldn't." I didn't have words, so I just squeezed back. That night, after the last guests departed and Lily retreated to her room, I sat alone on the porch watching stars emerge over the desert. The saguaros had healed, stress fractures fading into memory. The garden thrived. The gate stood solid at the end of the driveway, its sun motif holding the last light. 18 months ago, I'd come to Arizona seeking refuge from grief. I'd found a battle instead, one I'd never asked for, against an enemy I'd never anticipated. But sitting here now, I understand something about the difference between the peace you're given and the peace you build with your own hands. One can be taken, the other becomes part of who you are. I raised my coffee cup toward the bright star above the eastern mountains, the one I'd claimed for Elena the night after her funeral. "We kept it," I whispered. "Everything you wanted for us." The desert answered with silence and the distant song of a cactus wren settling for the night. I finished my coffee, checked the locks from habit rather than fear, and went to bed in a home that felt like a sanctuary again, somewhere out there. Gerald Gomez was starting his community service hours, learning what it meant to serve rather than rule. Somewhere, Kelly Reyes was drafting agendas for a board that would actually protect residents instead of persecuting them. Somewhere, the Nguyens were telling their children that sometimes justice takes longer than it should, but it does arrive. And here, on a half-acre of Arizona desert, a widower and his daughter were sleeping peacefully in a house no one had managed to take from them. Not through harassment, not through intimidation, not through a convoy of trucks and men in matching polos who thought uniforms meant authority. The gate Jorge built would outlast us all iron and craft, and a message hidden on the back for anyone who needed to find it. Stand your ground. We had, we did, we always would.